You spoke about Antonio Conte there. Let's go back a touch because, of course, Antonio Conte was the manager of Inter Milan. And we talk about ripple effects. They are now going at it for the Serie A title. Antonio Conte, of course, is at Napoli. To go back to understand where this Inter Milan team is now, if we go to the 2019-20 season, Antonio Conte sort of came through the door. They finished second in Serie A, knocked out in the Champions League group stage, went on to finish runners-up in the Europa League, losing to Sevilla 3-2. And then in the 2020-21 season, Conte wins Serie A. They're knocked out in the group stage of the Champions League again, though. And then the end of that season, he left by mutual consent after achieving Serie A glory, as we said, in 2021. What was the feeling around Inter Milan when he left the club? Because
there's so much to unpack there. As always with Antonio Conte, I mean, I always say that time is relative. 1 human year is 10 Inter years, like dog years. Inter is a club that Giovanni Trapattoni, the legendary Inter coach, said, when you walk into Inter, and he came from a Juve that literally won every single trophy in the 80s and 90s, early 80s, from European UEFA Cup, Cup Winners' Cup, European Cup, the league, they won everything with Platini, Boniek and them, right? He says when he walks into Inter, it was like stepping into a centrifuge. So Inter is a place where it is just, the pressure is unbelievable. It's always high pressure at all these clubs, but there's a different kind of pressure. I think centrifuge is exactly the right word that Trapattoni used.
Why do you think that's unique to Inter?
It's the history of the Tottenham. It's the history of Inter Milan. I mean, every club has its own identity and DNA, and Inter is a very special place in that aspect. This is why the club is called Crazy Inter, Pazza Inter. They have their own identity. It's the club that it's only Inter that can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in ways that only Inter can do, and the opposite is also true. That spectrum is in the DNA and of the club, and that's exactly what Antonio Conte, when he took over Inter, said. Coming from Juve, he is Mr. Juve. He is Lo Stile Juve, where you win in a certain way, you win without drama, you almost win with surgical precision. And the first thing he said when he was appointed Inter manager was, "I want to make Inter a little less crazy, a little less pazza."
How did that go down?
Well, I think most Inter fans are tired of that. So yeah, that great. But the problem is that it's just not possible. And as he learned too, you could see him in literal physical pain on the sidelines towards the end of his tenure. I remember watching a game the second season after, because I mean, this was all during COVID as well. I mean, midway through his first season, COVID hit. And when the second season began, I think it's one of the earliest games against Fiorentina. They're like 2 goals down and they turn it around and win 3-2 or 4-3 or something stupid, crazy like Inter always do. And he's literally nauseous. You can see on the sidelines, he's physically ill. He doesn't like this at all. He wants to win comfortably. And I remember watching it on Swedish TV, and Jesper Husfeldt, legendary Swedish commentator, after the final goal goes in, says something which has always stayed with me. He says, "Yeah, Antonio Conte, this is how they win games in black and blue. Just get used to it. Pazza Inter." And this is while the shot of Antonio Conte looking like he's about to throw up because he's so physically ill after having won that game like that. He doesn't like winning like that.
Yeah.
That's what Inter is. And that's how that season was. It was highs and lows. Inter finished last in their Champions League group stage for the first time in their history. He bottles it completely. That's the second season. And then from mid-January, after that loss to Sampdoria away, something clicks. He reveals that he's been working with Christian Eriksen, who he had mistreated for a year, to play him as a regista. He had managed to work Ivan Perisic as a left wing back. And from then on, Inter didn't look back. They turned into this monster, this Antonio Conte machine that just destroyed every team they played from that game, that pretty much the following weeks afterwards, and then they cruised to the title. There was no discussion. I mean, the dethroning of Juve, the result, the history books say 2-0, but it wasn't 2-0. It was a more accurate description or reflection of that game had been a 4-5-0 scoreline. Inter completely mopped the floor with Juve in that game. And this was his tactical masterclass. He built this machine, and that's why, because he is so agitated and so married to everything he does, at the end of that, Inter were in financial problems, and they had to recalibrate, because Antonio Conte guarantees results, but he also guarantees financial meltdowns everywhere he goes.
Yeah. And he has, that comes with him, doesn't it? He has to be backed, and he was. And yeah, I guess
he was, but he still complained about it. I mean, the first summer he was at Inter for 5 minutes essentially, where he started moaning about why Lukaku wasn't signed. Then when Lukaku was signed at a club record, before that Nicolo Barella was signed at a club record. Later that autumn, when Inter are 2-0, or I can't remember exactly which game, but he goes on this famous rant, or he thinks he's being charming. This is Antonio Conte putting on the charm on Italian TV, saying things like, well, non ci sono tanti soldini. There's not a lot of money at this club. When the club has literally broken its transfer record twice to buy him 2 players that he demanded. Then you have him, after losing to Borussia Dortmund to the Champions League, after being 2-0 up at half-time, going meeting the Italian press, and they're like, what happened? And he's like, what do you want me to do? We buy players from Sassuolo and Cagliari, and others buy from other big clubs. And it's hilarious to me, because the players he's referring to is Stefano Sensi from Sassuolo and Nicolo Barella from Cagliari, 2 players up until that time that were his best players. But it's, this is just part and parcel of Antonio Conte. And
do you think is he compelled within his own soul to speak that way, or is he being cute?
Well, he was angry then, but the non ci sono tanti soldini, there's not a lot of money, that's him thinking he's being a bit cute. Right. But he does believe that. Yeah, I mean, it's obvious he believes that. I mean, we're recording this after a weekend where Napoli, after 33 match days, are tied with Inter at 73 points, top of the Serie A. And this is a Napoli that qualitatively has no business challenging for a Serie A title. If he wins it, it'll be his masterclass. It'll be his Mona Lisa. It's his miracle. It's his greatest managerial miracle. Now, you'd think that a normal person in that situation doesn't want to rock the boat. Antonio Conte, before the game, during the game, after the game, is hurling tactical nuclear weapons at the club. Like, literally, hurling, abusing fans, telling them to F off. Before the game, he's talking about how I've learned that in the last 8 months that certain things at Napoli can't be done. He's asked to expand that, refuses to. After the game in the press conference, after they've won, by the way, he says, at the end of the season, I'm going to sit down and talk with the club president, Aurelio De Laurentiis, because I refuse to put my my backside, in a position where it can be abused, abusato. Wow. I mean, this is him, top of the league.
He's impossible, isn't he?
Listen, he's a genius. He's a tactical genius. And all brilliant people are very difficult to work with. And he's no exception. And the problem, and at the same time, he doesn't, when he's talking about how he was moaning a couple of months ago about how he's always the coach they bring in when they need immediate results, but he's never the coach allowed to reap the benefits or the fruits of his hard labor. And it's like, well, caro Antonio, let's have a little recap of your dear career, shall we? You left Juventus after you won your 3rd consecutive Serie A title. You threw an absolute hissy fit saying you can't win. When they asked you about the Champions League, you threw a complete hissy fit saying you can't eat at €100 restaurant with 10 euros at your pocket, because back then club manager or club CEO Beppe Marotta refused to pay 55 or 40 million euros for Juan Iturbe, who you demanded at the time, because he's smarter than the average bear, Marotta. I mean, it's just, things like that. Then you walked out of the Italy job, creating enemies there. You went to Chelsea, and I think no one needs any introduction at what he did at Chelsea and the manner in which he left Chelsea. Then he goes to Inter. You win the trophy. They bend over backwards to make you happy. After the first season ends in COVID, you're standing there screaming at the camera saying the club has backed you 0-0. Then you go on this rant. I mean, it's, and then you go to Spurs and you basically sack yourself. I mean, it's just, it's like, yes, that is true. You've never been able to stay longer at a club, but that's because it's your fault.
Yeah.
People don't like being thrown under the bus, and you don't just throw people under the bus, you throw the bus at them.
Incredible. So this is what I mean. We'll get to this question later down the line, but this is what's fascinating here is like, I'm going to say yin and yang, but just like the polar opposite, like feels like the sensibilities of these two people. Yeah, but him with himself, but also him and Inzaghi, and of course, so Inzaghi comes through the door, and one of the questions we're going to put to you, which kind of backs up what you're saying here, is that in the 2020-21 season, it saw the first big departure. Icardi left for PSG. They did still invest some important money, as you say, signing Barella on a permanent transfer, Hakimi from Real Madrid, who was key to their Serie A success. Conte then left the club after winning in 2021, as Lukaku and Hakimi were both sold because they kind of had to be due to financial troubles. And so when Inzaghi comes through the door, Inzaghi, a very brief history on him, he'd been at Lazio. Prior to that, he'd been at the academy at Lazio and sort of took the job after, I think Bielsa left after just a couple of days.
Yeah.
So Antonio Conte's 2-year spell at Inter Milan, did it make Simone Inzaghi's job harder because he had to navigate the financial trouble of losing key players? Did you think it made it harder for him to come in? Or the other side we were going to get to was the fact that Antonio Conte had changed Spalletti's 4-2-3-1 to his 3-5-2. Did that sort of negate the financial problems, because at least with Inzaghi, who also likes to play 3-5-2, he was able to come into something that was already had some of the player profiles that he would have needed to play 3-5-2?
That's a very interesting question, but we need to divide it into some subsections here in order to answer that accurately. The first thing with Mauro Icardi, Raja Nainggolan, and so on, when Conte was appointed and Perisic, the previous season, Inter had turned into a reality show under Spalletti. Icardi's captain armband had been famously stripped off his arm because his then agent, now I don't know what to refer that relationship to, Wanda Nara and Mauro Icardi. She was on TV every week saying stupid things, disrupting the Inter dressing room. There was infighting because of her behavior. Spalletti had to remove the captain's armband from Icardi. Icardi then faked injury for about 3 weeks, refusing to play. Complete chaos, shambles. So at the end of that season, Marotta had to get rid of Spalletti. He had to get rid of Icardi. He had to send Perisic, who was the one of the players Icardi had a conflict with. And he had to get rid of Raja Nainggolan, who sat boasting in Belgian media about how the club and him had worked out a schedule for when he can go to nightclubs or not. It was complete chaos. And Antonio Conte's not going to accept that. Yeah. So they sent Perisic on loan to Bayern Munich, which was probably the best thing that could have happened to Perisic's career, because there he became this kind of super fitness CrossFit guy, which is now why he can still play at such a high level. Icardi was sent away because of, they said that certain things we can't accept, that initial press conference, certain behaviors we can't accept. A year later, Ivan Perisic is brought back in when in the middle of COVID, and they were able to, Nainggolan was again sent away when they got him back. He brought in Arturo Vidal, he brought in Alexander Kolarov that next summer, and Matteo Darmian, sacrificing a deal Inter had with Sandro Tonali, which Inter had to do because they needed to keep this man quiet and calm. And so that leads us nicely to the tactical aspect of it. And the tactical aspect is Antonio Conte likes to play vertical football, the verticalizzazione del calcio, like the way that you play the all-important long ball up to Romelu Lukaku. He plays with his back against the goal, who Lukaku, let's remember, didn't know how to play like that until Conte got his hands on him. And famously put, as he said, I tattooed Andrea Ranocchia on Lukaku's back for a preseason, and after that he could play with his back against the goal. So he did that. So the all-important first ball to Lukaku, who plays it off centrally to the midfielder, who then moves it forward, plays it either right or left. This kind of vertical sawing through, of teams, very rigidly controlled like a marching band. You need all the instruments in tune and at the same time doing that same thing. When Inter wins the Scudetto, you see the perfect, for me, it's Antonio Conte's football at its best. I don't think I've ever seen Conte's football ever be expressed better than those 4 or 5 months. The transition from the 3-5-2 to 4-2-4. Let's remember, Conte started his career playing 4-2-4, but he had to turn it back because it wasn't defensively stable and he would get found out in the Serie A and other places. So he changed to a 3-5-2, but he always had this from a 3-5-2 to a 4-2-4, meaning when he, with Eriksen and Brozovic kind of becoming some sort of a double pivot, you had Lukaku and Lautaro up front, and you had the wing backs becoming wingers. You had the right centre back and left centre back becoming fullbacks. This transition from a 3-5-2 to a 4-2-4 via the vertical football is playing his vertical football is how Inter won that league, right. And they were unplayable. They just sweep they mopped the floor with everyone for 4 months, and it was probably up until then. It was the most beautiful football I think I've seen Inter play from a structural position. And I've watched Inter since '89. It was balanced perfectly defensively. And there was so much clear coherence going forward. With this title race, look, Inter drew the start of, one thing Inter did last season, and the reason why they ran away with the title was that they barely, hardly set a new record for least amount of goals conceded in games after the 75th minute. That's not true anymore because they're fatigued. They're exhausted. 4-2 up against Juve in the 73rd minute, 4-4. 2-0 up against Parma, ends 2-2. 2-1 up against Genoa away, concede at the death, 2-2. Same thing with Bayern Munich. Even the game they won, 2-1 away at Munich. Thomas Müller equalizes in the 88th minute. You can time and time again. Bologna on the weekend, 95th minute, conceded. Like, they don't have the energy mentally or physically to do what they've done whilst competing on all these fronts. So he's had to kind of push forward a little bit in order to secure the games and to secure the points. And if you look at the remaining fixtures, Inter have got Roma on the weekend. Well, first they got Milan in the Coppa Italia tonight. We're recording this on Wednesday. Then they got Roma on Sunday at 3 p.m. after a unbelievable shit show where Italian football did Italian football at its best yesterday, where the game was moved from Saturday to Sunday 12:30, then back to Saturday evening. Then Inter did not want to play on Saturday, so they moved it back to Sunday. All of this happened in the space of 1 hour in front of the whole world to see, because the Pope passed away and Italian football, the people who run it, are so woefully unorganized that everything explodes in their faces for the whole world to see. So we had an hour where the game was moved in 3 different slots in 2 different days. But they finally decided 3 p.m. Sunday. So they got Roma on Sunday. Then they've got Barcelona on Wednesday. Then they got Verona. Then, if I'm not mistaken, I think after that they've got they got Barcelona again. And then they've got Torino. They've got Lazio. And then if they go to the final of the Coppa Italia, they got. It's just.
So you can't underestimate how incredible it is. Like, almost going against what you said a little bit earlier. On paper, you go, Napoli shouldn't be near Inter Milan here, but when you're getting stretched as much as they are, and one stat that kind of proves it, Inter Milan have used more substitutes than any other team, and that is Inzaghi trying to manage the situation here. It's going to be, there could certainly be some kind of twists and turns here when it comes to them. Como, last game of the season, be interesting as well for Inter Milan.
I think that my prediction has been that I think Napoli are going to finish on 82 points and Inter on 80.
I think
Napoli are winning this. Yeah, I think they are. I think they're doing it, and I think the reason they're doing it is because they've got Torino, Lecce, Genoa, Parma, and Cagliari left. I see them winning 3, drawing 2, whilst I see Inter drawing 3 and winning 2.
Okay. And based on but that's such an advantage, isn't it, to sort of have the spiritual, emotional, physical bandwidth to attack those games with the velocity that a Conte team can do.
Yeah, and also, look, it's Antonio Conte. One thing that you have to give him credit for, even though he likes to, the man could walk into a mortuary and pick a fight with the dead people in the freezers, even though he has that particular talent, he's also unbelievable at shielding the group and creating a group of players that will go to war for him. He protects the squad from all this nonsense, which is a unique ability. His community, like when he works with the players, they do what he wants. They listen to him. They respect him. So while all of this nonsense is going outside, it doesn't creep into the dressing room. That's been his superpower, I'd say, as a coach so far. Maybe not at Chelsea, where he deliberately blew up the dressing room with the whole nonsense with Diego Costa.